Welcome to the hidden houses of death, rebirth, and transcendence. This is for the ones who've been living on the edge of the veil their entire life. I'm talking to you, the dreamers, the feelers, the seers, the mystics, the psychics, the healers, the ones who know without knowing how you know. If you've ever felt like you tune into things that others can't, and maybe you don't even understand it, but you know something is there. And also, you might perhaps feel like the world doesn't fully see you. Your birth chart could reveal the magic that is stored in those hidden places and why you can tap into the unseen without even understanding it yourself. We're in the season of the veils thinning. This is the perfect time to explore the hidden and the unseen in your astrology and how your birth chart holds the blueprint of these deeply intuitive gifts and power, especially if you have placements in the 8th or 12th houses or both, or you're here to serve others who do. This episode will change the way that you connect with these houses, these parts of your life that these houses touch, and the gifts that they provide. Welcome to Wildly Rooted Spirit and the Feed Your Wild podcast. I'm Vanessa Rodriguez, Akashic Channel intuitive guide and clinically trained healer that has been assisting other dreamers, healers, mystics, light workers for over a decade. And I can tell you that the majority of them have had some sort of prominent relationship, whether they were aware of it or not, with the 8th and or 12th house. So I thought it was really important to talk about these because these houses can be seen as really difficult, challenging houses. I mean, they're called the house of death or the house of bad spirit. It's like, oh my goodness. If I have a ton of placements here, if I got a stellium in the 8th and 12th house, like, is my life doomed? So I want to share what I have gleaned through working with so many healers, but also others, clients and patients when I was doing more clinical work at the time, and what I saw through their charts and specifically with the 8th and 12th houses. It's my intention that you walk away today with a deeper and clearer understanding of what these hidden houses mean and mean for you, especially if you've always felt different, overwhelmed, or more spiritually open than others in ways that you can't really explain. And that you walk away with recognition of your intuitive gifts that are provided to you through these houses that may have previously felt more like burdens. And also a reframe on this concept of visibility and your experience of visibility within your own life and how to reclaim it in a way that really honors your energy and your soul design. Not everybody is meant to have their face on a book or, to be on stage, so to speak. So what does visibility really mean and look like for you in your life? I also intend for you to walk away with the affirmation that your sensitivity, your mediumship, your dream visions, those intuitive gifts that you have, they're real and they matter. And that working with the 8th house and the 12th house can be really beautiful steps toward healing inherited wounds and embodying your sacred calling. So who am I to talk about the 8th and 12th houses? Well, for starters, I have prominent 8th house placements in my chart. It's a very important chart, prominent part of my chart. And so looking back at my life of, 40 plus years, I can tell you that I definitely can see what has felt like challenges and burdens through those 8th house experiences, but also the gifts and sensitivities. I have walked through the darkness. I have had many experiences that are unconscious as a child that I'll share in just a moment. But it really reflects, now understanding what I know about astrology and being able to read my own chart, it really explains so much about my connection with the unseen since I was young. So I was raised around, religion, yes, but spirituality as well. On my father's side of the family, my grandmother, my abuela, would actually, this happened a couple of times, spontaneously go into channeling mode. And I remember one specific time she did this at the kitchen table at her house. And when I looked over at my dad, he just looked so incredibly mortified. So clearly it was something that maybe happened previously. That was the first time that it happened in front of me. But it was something that my father was definitely embarrassed about and wanted no part of. But that was just something. She had a very strong connection with angels and with her ancestors. And she spoke of stories of how her own grandmother was a psychic, and even described my grandfather, the man who she eventually married, when my grandmother was a little girl. So there were these stories and experiences like that I had growing up in my family. And I remember and I know that this is so true because I literally work with hundreds of healers. And so I hear this constantly, especially highly intuitive and sensitive healers that have these gifts, that since childhood, there has been perhaps like both a fear yet fascination with the dark. I remember too having a profound fear of the dark. I also, for many, many years as a kid, had insomnia because I was afraid of turning off the light, but then I couldn't fall asleep with the light on. And I had other health issues as well growing up that prevented me from having good sleep. But I could literally sense and feel energies around me, but I couldn't see them. So, and I didn't have anybody that could sort of take me under their wing at that time and have me feel protected. And the one thing that did was through prayer, actually. My family, both sides come from Puerto Rico, and Catholicism is the religion that my family was raised in. So I was raised Catholic. And so prayer and speaking with the angels was something that brought a sense of support and a little bit of protection and security. And so that's something that I would do as a little kid because I didn't know what else to do about this. When I was in college, I surprised everybody with the topic that I chose for my thesis. In order to graduate, I had to write a thesis paper, and my topic was the death squads of Brazil. So here I am. I'm a pretty jovial person in that, like, Jupiter is my ruling planet. I'm a Sag rising. Like, there's a lot of this jovialness that I bring, which I feel is kind of contradicts that darker side that I'm drawn to. But I literally had this fascination with death squads. I was like, why is that even a thing? And I wanted to dive deeper and understand the psychology around it, the energetics around it, and also like how society plays and culture plays a role in all of that. My father, speaking of our family line, my father is the embodiment of 12th houser. If we have these personalities of 12th house, he has a stellium in the 12th house. And he, throughout my childhood, worked the night shift. He actually worked 2 jobs. So we didn't get to see him a ton during periods of our childhood because of that. But he worked the night shift for decades, and that was normal for him. He actually had no problem working at night, and how that can be physically very taxing for a lot of people. And he was totally okay with it. So it's that, like, the night shift. He also was not recognized for a lot of the things that he did. He did a lot for others in his workspace. And so there's this thing around, like, invisibility, not fully being seen and recognized. He also is a psychic in his dream space and dreamscape. escape. So he's a dream psychic, what I call a dream psychic, right? So if you're one of those that in your dreams, that's when you get premonitions, you get insights, you connect with ancestors and the dead and other entities and angels and receive messages. That's my dad. But it's funny because he doesn't see it as necessarily a gift to be working with. It's just who he is. So the way that it comes through for him is like he'll get really practical dreams. Like, for example, oh, there's a leak on the second floor apartment. And then the next day it turns out to be real. But as I'll get into, the 12th house is a space for the dreamers. This is where the dream space is. So it makes sense that for him, this is where he connects with the unseen and receives messages. Now, with my personal experience with the 8th house is the house of death and loss. There have been many deaths that I and my family have navigated in our family. And one of them being my own mother and her journey with breast cancer and how challenging that was. Another experience that's very 12th house of my dad's is his caretaking of my grandmother who had Alzheimer's. So these are common experiences for those with significant placements in these houses, 8th house or 12th house. And there is a lot that we learn through those trials and tribulations and that are very informative for who we are and what we become. And through my mother's death, that initiated me into, really catapulted me into this work, healing work, as well as my spiritual awakening. So I've been working with the Akashic Records professionally for over a decade. And through that work, guiding hundreds of healers and intuitives through this exact terrain. Now I'm able to study their charts, their stories, their souls through the records, and I see energetic patterns over and over. So with that, let's get into the specifics of the 8th and 12th house and why the 8th and 12th houses. Well, these two houses are part of the hidden houses that are within your chart, your natal chart. These are considered the mystic gates of healing, of suffering, and of spiritual awakening. Both houses, the 8th and the 12th, are portals into the unseen. So they reveal where the soul learns, but learns through loss, through struggle, through surrender, and ultimately transcendence. This is where we meet the mysteries of life and the mysteries of death, the shadow and the light, the self and spirit. Now, the 8th house is the alchemy of death and rebirth. This is a crucible point where the soul learns to die and learns about dying before actual death. So the 8th house is not so much about your death as it is about death and the death of others. The 12th house is the initiation through compassion, service, and union with the divine through darkness, which can often include solitude, struggle, and loss. Called the house of death by the ancients, the 8th house governs both literal and symbolic endings and everything that is birthed from those ashes. In modern astrology, it's understood as the realm of sexual intimacy, transformation, psychological rebirth, while also remaining the house of shared resources, inheritances, and other people's money. So this can include investments, loans, legacies, and energetic exchanges. It's basically the money that you don't do things to get. It's inheritances, it's loans, it's residuals, it's things that like passive income, right? From other people's money. So that's what 8th house resources are. People with strong 8th house activations often experience powerful turning points in their life. This could look like divorce, retirement, sudden loss, or even the death of an old identity. It really is where we face endings, emotional, energetic, financial, and relational. And we learn through this experience to rise, to be wiser, more resilient, and it informs us spiritually. The 8th house is also the domain of secrets, of research, metaphysics, psychic ability, mediumship, and the occult and occult arts. There are many writers, investigators, mystics, and those who study the mysteries of life and death who have planets here. One famous person who has placements here is author J.K. Rowling, who wrote the Harry Potter series. So these are stories of the occult and magic, but also of loss and rebirth, and have enchanted millions of people across the globe. She has a stellium in the 8th house. In Vedic astrology, the 8th house is both considered a moksha house. This is a house of spiritual liberation, as well as dusthana house, which is a house of suffering and purification. So this is both the 8th and the 12th houses that are considered this in the Vedic lineage. The 8th house lessons of loss and release are never easy. I mean, these are not easy houses, and that's not the point. They are gateways. And they are gateways to awakening certain gifts within ourselves and awakening us to our paths on a soul level. If you're looking for some keywords for the 8th house, those would be death, secrets, study, research, sex, inheritance, other people's money, transformation, the occult, psychic ability, elimination, and renewal. In ancient astrology, the 8th house was called the idle place. And this is not because nothing happens here, but it's because much of what does happen in here is outside of our control. It's through others and outer circumstances. It's where we are acted upon by life and death and fate and others' choices. So it can feel like the things that in life that are activated by the 8th house are completely out of our control. This is one of the houses, as is the 12th house, that does not see the ascendant, which is who we are and our sense of self, which means that its work is in the shadows. It's in the unfolding of the shadows. So when we consider shadow work, those are the elements that we do not see that are within our unconscious, and that's what the 8th and 12th houses are connected to. Yet that unseen space is where our deepest medicine is. That's where it's made. So for my mystics and healers, this is really speaking to the mysteries that we hold that others cannot see. So the parts of our practice that is really forged in invisibility. It's the work that we do that nobody sees, but that's the work that matters. So here we meet other people's resources, right? So money, energy, and trust, what we owe and what we are owed, both karmically and materially, and the merging that occurs. Is the 8th house is also about entanglements, the merging that occurs through intimacy, through contracts, soul contracts included, and creation. It's the realm of joint ventures, of these soul bonds and energetic cords and exchanges. So this is the alchemy of mine and yours. That's why I see so many therapists with significant 8th house placements. It makes sense, right? Because we are here to serve others and assist others through their entanglements, through their challenges, through the shadows and all of that. Other people's shit, right? We're helping others with their shit. That is 8th house to a T. There are certain patterns that I want to pull out for each house that you may have experienced within your own life and that you can recognize. So the first pattern that I want to touch on with the 8th house specifically is death, loss, and the beyond. Death is not an ending. It is an initiation. And early encounters with loss or endings are very common with 8th house placements. And these experiences forge resilience and empathy in people with these placements. So many with strong 8th house placements have walked through literal or symbolic underworlds, illness, death, grief, even identity death, and then emerged transform. So learning to walk with death is to understand life more deeply, and that's something that I see folks with 8th house placements usually do and learn very early on. Another pattern with the 8th house is sexuality, intimacy, and potentially trauma woven with these. The 8th house binds, and part of this binding can be through sexuality. And sexuality and mortality are bound together, right? Because you need sex for life. Both require a kind of surrender. Historically, the 8th house was also linked to pregnancy. So these ordinary miracles that bring us face to face with both life and death. And interestingly, the ancients also connected the 12th house, which we'll get into, with childbirth because of that same sort of liminal space and facing potential death with every birth. Healers with this signature often carry some degree of sexual or relational trauma that then becomes the seed for their medicine and also their connection with their internal power. So this is something that I have seen, and I think a really powerful reminder that, again, within the 8th and 12th houses, these can carry very traumatic experiences. And I don't want to downplay these or say that they're all fated or meant to be. I don't actually believe that. But for the instances where it has happened, there is an irreversible impression it makes on someone. And these very challenging experiences forge us. It is something that we cannot avoid and that we're invited to work with in order to heal and, if you so choose, to be able to support others. Pattern number 3 is energy sensitivity and healing. So the 8th house awakens this wounded healer archetype. And I know that we can often connect that with Chiron. I feel like 8th house has a similar vibe. Because it rules shared energy, these souls who have prominent 8th house placements are natural empaths. So absorbing everything, the moods and pains and energies of others, and very often early on not understanding that those aren't even yours. That was me for years. So the task here is to transmute what is inherited, grief, addiction, ancestral trauma, into wisdom and service, but also to release what was never yours to begin with. Here, this is where we learn that your empathy is sacred technology, but there is a way to work with it. It must be tended with discernment. Pattern number 4, psychic and spiritual gifts. Through the darkness, light emerges. This is, in the 8th house, is where I see all of my medium clients with mediumship gifts, have some sort of 8th house placement or it's prominent in their chart. Otherwise, they have other multiple signatures for mediumship, but the 8th house is very often included. Also, the Akashic records, channeling, ancestral healing, the occult arts, they all live here. This is where the living converse with the dead, the seers of our world, piercing the veils of illusion. This is the lineage of the mystic and the witch, where spiritual gifts are remembered through blood and soul. So many healers that I know that have these placements start off with fear of the unseen because they could feel it much more deeply than others can. But the unseen world is not to be feared. That connection and closer proximity to the unseen, literally your veil is thin 365 days, like year round, not just now. It's part of your design. And so learning to support yourself with working with the unseen, even if you don't mean to do it as your profession. It is something that you will always attune to or feel. So making sure that you gather the tools and the knowledge to support yourself through that. And the last pattern that I'll touch on with the 8th house is secrets, shadow, and hidden truth. So this is the space where there's those betrayals, there's the secrets, there's shadow patterns, and mystics with strong 8th house placements are truth tellers. They walk into the darkness, face addiction or grief or trauma, and again, they'll attune to things that others can't see and then bring them to light very often through their communication. What's the medicine of the 8th house? Well, I named a few already, but transformation, ultimately, through emotional honesty, through energetic clearing, through surrender, being able to hold and navigate another's energy, but with discernment and without losing your own, to release fear of your own power. And remember that every ending is a beginning disguised as loss. Now, the 12th house. The 12th house governs the unseen realms as well. Dreams, karma, solitude, confinement, and spiritual service. Traditionally, it's called the House of Bad Spirit, and the ancients said this was a place linked with exile, with illness, and with self-undoing. Yet, for mystics, it's this cocoon between lives, this temple of surrender where the soul dissolves illusion and then is able to return to source. In mundane life, this house rules hospitals, retreats, monasteries, mental health work, and time spent in solitude. So these are the spaces where real healing happens behind closed doors. These are the folks that we don't see, and we don't see what they're dealing with. That's why I also see a lot of therapists and healers who have these placements in helping support people through mental health, through spiritual awakenings and challenges. This house can bring deep spiritual wisdom and also moments of loss or separation that force awakening. It can also govern spiritual pilgrimages and foreign lands. So that's that like retreating far away to an ashram, so to speak, is very 12th housey. And it's the experiences that remove us from daily life so that we can remember the sacred. It's also, like I mentioned, associated with dreams and past lives, as well as hidden enemies. Hidden enemies can be aspects of ourselves within our own consciousness, within the psyche. This can also be unseen entities and attachments. And it can be other humans or people that you experience as adversarial in your life. In Vedic astrology, again, the 12th house is also considered a moksha and a dusthana house, tied to spiritual liberation, karma, and the element of water. So it rules the final dissolution of form so that the soul can release what you cannot carry forward. Some keywords for the 12th house are loss, separation, past lives, sleep, dreams, imagination, spiritual focus, divine service. Now, ultimately, the 12th house is a kind of womb space, the womb of surrender. So here is where the soul is literally stripped of identity and in solitude, in stillness, must connect back with the infinite self and with God's source creator. What can appear as a kind of exile often hides grace and some gifts. This house, like the 8th house, is also hidden from the ascendant, a place where they can't see each other. So again, it's connected to what unfolds on an unconscious level. And it really calls us to a tremendous amount of humility and forgiveness and faith in what we cannot see and what cannot be proven. I very often see really compassionate healers here learning the art of devotion and release. Some patterns with the 12th house. The first is the absent or distant parent, and very often connected with the father. So these are earthly losses that open the door to our psyche, to our self-understanding, to the divine. And many with sons in the 12th house might have some story around the disconnection or distancing from a father figure or like a guiding masculine figure. And this absence awakens something within them, like a longing that leads to the true divine parent within themselves. So what can feel like distance or abandonment is an initiation to belonging to spirit and to cultivating that with that connection within themselves. The second pattern is feeling different and invisible, or maybe not from here. Hello, starseeds. This is the 12th house starseed placement. The 12th house soul can often feel misplaced, like they're not supposed to be here, or they're kind of like the weirdo here in this world, or they're half in this world and half beyond it. You know, they kind of feel like in that liminal space. Their sense of invisibility is not something that is a flaw, but it's like this sign of attunement to the subtler realms and frequencies. Another pattern is dreams, visions, and astral awareness. So this is where the dream world is really alive and awake. And this is the realm, again, of the prophetic dreams, like my dad, astral traveling, and communion with collective unconscious. So the lessons here with the 12th house, if this is you, is trust your dreams. They are part of your experience. It's not just about your waking life, it's about your sleeping life as well. Pattern number 4, romantic idealism and secret love, which is something, again, that is very interesting with the 12th house that has come up. The 12th house really teaches about self-love through disillusionment. And so sometimes love in the beginning can feel incredible for these 12th housers. And it may, however, be rooted in a fantasy that then will eventually mature into compassion. Because what I have seen with those with significant 12th house placements is they hold a lot of compassion, but that again is created through usually challenging life experiences. So these experiences teach the difference between empathy and enmeshment, which is a hard lesson. Ultimately, you learn that you are your own beloved, and perhaps that longing for love is through communion with divine love and self-love. The last pattern I want to speak to is service, sacrifice, and escapism. So true service is balanced service. This is the house of the healers, the mystics, the therapists, the monks, the nurses. I see you serving quietly, very often unseen. Shadows here in this space can look like martyrdom or addiction, but they're rooted again in that longing that I had mentioned, that longing to return to the divine. So the lessons here are serving from overflow and from a resourceful place, not from depletion, not from obligation, and that rest is devotion too. I said the last pattern, but I want to mention one more, and that is with this 12th house, spiritual gifts, angels, and divine connection. The veil is very thin with 12th housers, so many commune with angels, angelic energies, ancestors, and guides, just like the 8th house. They can recall lifetimes, and very often those lifetimes are in monasteries, they're in temples, they're in sacred orders, they're in religious orders. So you have that accumulation of lifetimes of devotion, and so that connection is still with you. You are not here to escape the world. You are here to help the rest of us in connecting more deeply with the divine and sanctifying the world. One thing that is really important that I noticed for my 12th housers is healing can come through solitude and rest. It's very important for my 12th house folks, meaning if you have planets in the 12th house or that the 12th house is prominent, like the sign is prominent in your chart for a particular reason, you can't skip on that rest. You can't skip on that solitude, on going off and just being in your own energy, going on a retreat, even if it's like locking your door and having your own space, not surrounded by anybody else. It really is needed for regeneration and refueling of the self. Meditation, dream work, prayer, art, all of those are really beautiful ways to reconnect to source for my 8th and 12th housers. And for mystics and healers, this is where the channel opens, right? Through that connection and through the imaginal and the creative and divine connection. Like I mentioned before, so many of the therapists, intuitives, body workers, and space holders that I've worked with have these placements. And so I want to draw out some real life case studies and examples and show you some charts. And all of these are shown with full permission and anonymously. But I'll share a little bit about their lives and what these placements have demonstrated for them in their connection within their own lived experience, as well as healers. So I'll call out some examples of dream psychics, somatic healers, and energy practitioners, as well as therapists. As promised, we're going to look at some charts here. And I had previously mentioned J.K. Rowling, the British writer of the immensely popular series of Harry Potter books. And she has over here a stellium in the 8th house, as you can see. She has her Mercury, Venus, Uranus, Pluto, and her moon all in the sign of Virgo, the writer, and as well as healer. And what's interesting with J.K. Rowling is not only did she write a book series about an 11-year-old schoolboy wizard and all of the magical and occult things that have been birthed through that series, and a fantastic success with the first 3 books. But she started from a place that was not as fortunate. When her daughter was born, she divorced a year later and was living on welfare with her infant daughter when she wrote Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And eventually that book became a sensation, which then turned into a movie series, and the rest of the story. So it's interesting because there's a lot of beneficial stuff that has come in for her through trials and tribulations, but there definitely is that emphasis on the occult. Here's Edgar Cayce, also known as the Sleeping Prophet. This is probably the most popular and famous American mystic and psychic. While in a sleep state, he could talk about literally anything because he was in trance: history, geology, metaphysics, philosophy, medicine. He would channel in for his clients and patients. He gave like around 30,000 life readings and medical diagnoses to people in his lifetime. So he has a stellium in the 8th house as well, in Pisces, with Mercury, Saturn, Venus, his sun, and North Node. He also has his lot of spirit in the 12th house, Cancer, which is ruled by Cancer there. And what's really interesting with him is that he founded a hospital. So hospitals belong to the 12th house, hospitals and prisons. And he provided a lot of support through his dream state for his clients that were essentially channelings from the Akashic records and tapping into their astrological blueprint. And this is how he would receive information. So it was in sleep state here, Pisces, in that 8th housey, very 8th housey person here, incredibly psychic, intuitive, a channel, and healer as well. But I love that added, literally creating a hospital with that 12th house lot of spirit. And a lot of spirit has to do very much with our purpose and where our spirit wants to go in this life and to bring forth in the lived experience. So he entered this field quite accidentally, because he couldn't cure himself of laryngitis, chronic laryngitis. And so he tried hypnosis out of desperation and was cured after several treatments. And it was under hypnosis, very 8th housey and 12th housey as well, where he gave his first psychic reading on in 1901. So that's where he learned that he could give these accurate medical diagnoses and healing recommendations for himself and for others. Now here is someone that is not as well known, well, at least in the mainstream, Padre Pio. He is an Italian healer and Capuchin monk. He's very long since passed, as you can see, birth date at 1887. But he was astigmatic, meaning that he had received the stigmata. So here you can see he has a pretty packed 8th house with his Mercury, Pluto, Sun, and Chiron in the sign of Gemini. And then his 12th house, ruled by Libra, he has his lot of spirit, just like Edgar Cayce, as well as Uranus and Jupiter. So what's really fascinating about Padre Pio is that he was the first priest said to be marked by God in 2,000 years. So he was one of those that had experienced stigmata. And this was witnessed and reported by tens of thousands of people. It wasn't like he was completely hidden. But what was so fascinating is that he was raised in a poor family. He was the 8th child from a poor family, and he followed his vocation, joining the Capuchins as a monk and under the order of the Franciscans. After receiving the stigmata, the church actually did not welcome it, and they restricted him to his quarters. So he literally was confined, 12th house. He was confined, and they really tried to keep everything under wraps, and probably so they could investigate as well. But there's a lot at play and politically within the church and the Catholic Church. Nonetheless, he was kept under tight watch. The Vatican forbade him to show his hands to anyone other than those that were inside of the order. And so for a period of about 2 to 3 years, he was literally sentenced to remain incognito, hidden completely, which didn't actually work because while he was in solitary confinement, people reported that he was seen at different homes, at the bedsides of ill people, people who were in need of healing. He was sometimes seen hundreds of miles away, supporting, comforting, healing people. And he was also seen praying in chapels. And the miracles that were documented were in the thousands. So in the tradition of stigmatics, he had the ability to do what's called bilocation, which is to be in one place, yet to be in another place simultaneously. He also was able to remote view and had knowledge of the past, present, and the future. He was also able to read souls and, of course, perform healings. With all of those gifts, though, he actually suffered greatly and continuously. He also had wounds on his feet, and he would also be seen levitating during Mass at times. He would go into states of mystical ecstasy, and in those states he appeared to be catatonic, but he was also heard conversing with unseen beings and angels. Despite the efforts of keeping him under wraps and in solitary confinement and hidden, he was known and visited by thousands, and it was their donations that helped to build and support a hospital. So here again, very 12th housey, hospitals and confinement under the 12th house. Now, I want to get into some anonymous charts because these are real life people, not just famous people and folks that we have, charts for in the Astro databanks. But I wanted to bring in insights into folks that have filled out my Astro survey for my own research. And some of these are also clients of mine. All of those that I'm going to show today have given me permission to share these anonymously. And so I just want to share some of these stories and backgrounds of folks who also carry these signatures. So here we have one, and this person has her Neptune in Scorpio in the 8th house and a stellium in the 12th house with Saturn, Venus, Sun, Chiron, and Mercury in the sign of Pisces. So this person is highly intuitive and a channel and medium, specifically connecting with more than human kin. So this person has the ability to communicate with animals, which is a signature also of Pisces. And Mercury being in Pisces, as you can see, a lot of these folks who are channels and mediums have that Mercury in Pisces signature. And also the 12th house is connected with animals as well, larger animals, but animals nonetheless, as is the 6th house here. She has also shared that her early life and ancestral lineage have had many struggles growing up and in the past. And so that's something that she has had to move beyond. She has also had the experiences of being ostracized or stigmatized and kind of pushed away. So that is an experience, very 12th house experience there. And she has had this connection and thirst for knowing the occult and the divine, which we could see very much with that Neptune in Scorpio in the 8th house. Next up, we have someone who has a stellium in the 8th house, once again, in the sign of Cancer with Sun, Mercury, and Mars. This person shares in the Astro Survey that the types of healing and intuitive work that they provide include energy healing, Akashic record reading, somatic healing, or body work, and psychotherapeutic and mental health. She is able to receive insights through claircognizance, which is intuitive knowing, and clairsentience, which is feeling. And one thing that is also very interesting is that she has a Taurus moon, and I find that that's very common for Taurus moons to be connected with somatic body work if they're a healer in some way, and the 6th house being the house of illness and health. She is a therapist that works primarily with survivors of trauma. So I see that a lot with healers with 8th or 12th house placements is that they also work with people who most likely have significant 8th and 12th house placements or situations that are very 8th housey and 12th housey. She also indicated that in her past, there were some challenges or trauma around sexuality and sexual trauma. So that is also very 8th housey, and we'll see that with some others as well. Next up, we have someone here with both 8th house indications as well as 12th house and the sun, as well as a lot of spirit and Venus in 12th house in the sign of Taurus. So this person talks about energy healing as the primary mode of intuitive healing work, and that they receive insights and their intuitive gifts are most demonstrated through clairsentience, that feeling, and claircognizance, intuitive knowing. This person practices a form of angelical Reiki, as well as a traditional indigenous form of medicine. She describes it as being in constant communication with divine spirits. What's interesting about her story is that she shares she discovered her gifts after diving into her own healing post a breakup. So this is where we see loss, separation being also a part of the path and journey of the wounded healer, and discovering their healing abilities through heartbreak, suffering, or loss. I mentioned before that a lot of folks with the 8th and 12th house placements will have these inclinations and insights and feeling senses since birth, like since they're little. And this person confirms that for themselves, that ever since they were a little girl, she had strong intuition But she never knew what it was about or why, and that why she knew things that she wasn't technically supposed to know, and that people would always say, you're a really smart child, but she didn't understand why. And so it wasn't until she really started to work on her intuitive gifts and connecting with those gut feelings and expanding the claircognizance and clairsentience that she was able to understand what was going on and cultivate discernment. Now, this person here, we see a 12th house stellium as well as a first house stellium. So it's a little heavier on this side of the chart. And that 12th house being in Libra, but as well as being a Scorpio rising. So that intuitive, typically when I'm looking at charts, the water signs are going to bring in that next level intuitive capacity and healing capacity. That's not to say that the other signs don't. Like, for example, Taurus is actually highly intuitive, mediumistic is what I have found as well. Each brings their own intuitive abilities, but what I see in terms of more like the channels and mediums and those that are connecting with the unseen in a deeper way, those are typically the folks that have the water signs in their charts activated. So this person is a tarot reader, Akashic record reader, and speaks of receiving intuitive downloads in dreams and as well as conscious states. But that dream work is something that is very much an active part of their life, as well as something that they are pursuing professionally with diving deeper into healing work as a therapist and studying to be a therapist. So this person is also a creative and weaves in their magic through creativity, art, wordsmithing. And while they have been a tarot reader and Akashic record reader, going into that psychotherapy realm is very much 12th housey as well, connecting in with mental health and the invisible diseases that others may be experiencing. The final chart that I'm going to share today is of someone who is a channel, medium, and a writer and creative. She accesses the Akashic records, but has always had the ability to connect with spirits, with the dead, with ancestors. So she has her 8th house, her Mercury in Gemini, so in domicile in the 8th house with the South Node. And then we have Pluto and Uranus in Libra in the 12th house. So she describes her first experience when she realized that she was highly intuitive when she was a young girl, and being able to remove a bad spirit from on top of herself when she was experiencing something in her room alone. And so that was kind of an awakening moment for her, where she realized there's more than just what we see, and that I also have agency through this connection. She also talks about having these connections in dream time, but also while she's awake, that she can work with elementals and spirits and helping to support almost as a psychopomp in helping others to move and move back and forth through the liminal and realms. That's very much Mercury in the sign of Gemini, where they have all the resources because that's their home and that's their domicile, but in the 8th house of the liminal spaces. And so this is literally other people and other things, other unseen and the dead. And so that psychopomp energy in there makes a lot of sense for her experience. One thing that she has shared is in childhood having experienced abuse as well as sexual trauma. And so once again, we see that in connection with 8th house and as well as 12th house, particularly that Pluto here in the 12th house. Now I'm being as I'm going through these charts, I'm going very quickly and I'm looking at the super high level, just the signs and the houses of the 8th and 12th and the planets there. But there's so much more to speak to in terms of the interconnections and the ruling planets and the signs and their particular conditions and their aspects. So I'm not getting super deep into this as an astrological tutorial, but I just wanted to highlight stories that really correlate and demonstrate how these 8th and 12th house themes can really show up in one's life, particularly for my healers. On the topic of visibility and invisibility, I mentioned how these are the hidden houses, right? They literally cannot be seen from the ascendant. They're considered invisible in that space. And so they're the liminal spaces and in connection with our unconscious and subconscious. What I have seen working with people with these placements and also within myself is a complicated relationship with visibility. So that could look like trying everything that you can to be recognized and visible, but it's not working, or perhaps having resistance to being seen and doing things at a subconscious level to sabotage visibility, or doing things that you wish to be recognized for, but you get passed over. For example, an accolade, a reward, or a promotion or raise. There is often what I would call witch wounds and persecution wounds woven in with this relationship with visibility and with the 8th and 12th house placements. It's all connected, all part of the story. And so this reframe with visibility I find helpful for 8th housers and 12th housers is that it doesn't have to look like being in the spotlight, right? Like I mentioned before, it doesn't have to look like you with your face on a poster or on the cover of a book or being on stage or having your face on social media constantly. There can be a veil between you and others. And I see this with my 5 lines, veering off a little bit from astrology, but with human design. There's this like play with the curtain and the veils and not fully being seen. And I feel like that is something that can work really well for folks in terms of their relationship with visibility and setting things up in place. So if you are a practitioner or a healer, or you have a business of some kind, so you want to be seen, right? You want to have the marketing, you want people to recognize you and see you. What are the ways tapping into your gifts of connection and communication and setting up systems so that people are able to find you and see you eventually, but not through you showing up and having your face blasted everywhere. This could look like many different things, but I'll give you some examples. Networking, plugging yourself into a network, partnering up with people in your business or in your community, joining communities and groups and clubs, using ads even that draw people to you. One example is that while I now have a YouTube channel and I'm doing videos, but for the previous 8 years that I've had my podcasts, they were all audio. And so it took me that long to get onto video. And it was all in perfect timing for me. There was a lot that was required beforehand until I got to this place. Even now, it's not fully comfortable for me to get in front of the camera and talk to you. It's much more comfortable to be behind the mic. But I am at a place where I can now do this. You have to cultivate a lot of patience and compassion for yourself and where you're at, and also simultaneously leaning into those places where you might have resistance around visibility, because there might be work there, and that is 8th house and 12th house work that we get to do. And that's the power of recognizing your design through your natal chart. So things to look for are any kind of placements in your 8th or 12th house, the planets that are there. Are your nodes there? Your north and south node. You may have specific asteroids that are conjunct your planets that are also markers for specific healing gifts. I have an entire workshop called Cosmic Gifts Clarity Blueprint where I dive into that and I teach you how to look for that, how to draw out your astrological archetype based off of your healing gifts through the natal chart, and some asteroids that you can look for that weave in archetypal stories and infuse, literally bake into your design, your divine design, these archetypal energies. If you're interested in learning more about that, I'll leave the link below. What happens in the 8th and 12th houses in our lived experience often feels faded, invisible, out of the blue or out of our control, or mysteriously orchestrated. Yet for mystics and healers, these so-called unfavorable houses really can become sacred training grounds, places where we learn to surrender what the ego cannot manage and to let the soul take the lead. So in this respect, the 8th and the 12th houses are really womb spaces of awakening. They truly demand humility before the revelation. So they are humbling houses, to say the least. Yet through them, we learn to serve. We learn to serve the unseen. We learn to serve others and to trust that journey, that spiralic journey of healing that leads to transformation, and ultimately trusting that spiralic journey of healing. Both the 8th and the 12th houses ask the same thing: release, surrender, letting go. They strip away illusion until only the essence remains. So it's no longer about avoidance of pain, heartbreak. It's about leaning in, becoming intimate with it. Through the 8th house, you are reborn. And through the 12th house, you remember that you were never separate to begin with. Together, they are the hidden houses, the soul's hidden map, the passage from the self to spirit, from survival into surrender, from human and the humanness of our daily lives to the holy. I hope this episode serves you and provides some food for thought. I'd love to hear from you, your insights, your ahas, your experiences in the comments. If you're over on YouTube, come join the conversation. And speaking of connecting with the ancestors, I'm hosting a live workshop on October 30th called Between the Veils, Ancestral Alchemy and Connection for Healers. I'm hosting it inside of my community called Bloom. There is a waitlist, so if you are interested in joining us, go ahead and join that waitlist. You can do so by clicking the link below. Until next time, have a beautiful liminal season. Stay on the path and be well.